So for this statue, which is we pinned it on stream a couple of streams ago. But we pinned this model a couple of streams ago, and we noticed that the statue has like a seam line in between, which we're gonna need to fill up because we're gonna see that it's kind of bad. So I'd rather not glue arms to a body, but for this statue you really kind of have to, because you're gonna see that it's really visible. So we wanna, I'll have to do something that I don't want to do, but we have no choice because we have to fill in that gap. This is Staan, the young blood, also sculpted by Narin. Again, came as a 1/6 scale resin kit. Beautiful statue, was intended as a beginner statue for people who just got into the hobby and want to learn kind of how to build their models, how to paint their models. Narin decided to start a beginner line for those people who are still practicing and stuff like that. But it's an excellent sculpt. It's beautiful. Quality is 100%. And the only thing that we have to do to it to make it paint ready is to fill in this seam line right here. For the other arm, for example, you can see that there is a seam line right there, but the seam line makes sense because the arm is has a band around it, which would in reality create like a line between the fabric and the skin. So this would not have to be filled up, in my opinion. And definitely if you wanna resell this, or if you're painting it for somebody, you wanna be able to remove the arm for shipping. But other than that, like for example, the back has a little bit of a gap, but that also the gap right there kind of makes sense for that to be there, because it's a separation line between his belt and his skin. So it kind of makes sense for that to be there, a line there. I would not personally would not fill that up. But on the other hand, if you're building this for yourself, which I am, I could always I could glue it, but I don't want to because it complicates the painting process. But it's in the back. It makes sense for there to be a line there because it's a separation line between two different materials, his skin and his belt. Kind of makes sense that there's a line. So, but for this arm, it's skin and skin, so the seam line is really visible right here. So we want to glue it and then fill it up with some clay. So that's what we're gonna do today. It's kind of challenging. I've never done it in such a capacity where I have to kind of go over this sculpted area. It's super sculpted right here, so I kind of have to watch and see if I can mimic that same pattern. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. Sculpting is not my thing at all. I'll leave that up to people who are more qualified to do it. But yeah, we're gonna glue it. Make sure it's in the correct position. And as you can see, we're gonna have to start here, fill up the entire line. All the way down there. All the way. I'm surprised that he went for the shoulder and not just the upper arm or something like that, and put a band around the arm as well. Like, it would make so much more sense. You can just stick the arm in. So not sure why he sculpted the shoulder right here and then didn't do the same here. So not sure, but maybe that's, he was like, yeah, I'm making a beginner's line, so I'm gonna make it a little bit challenging for people so that they can learn how to do the filling right away. So we're gonna take this super pliable children's clay, kids clay. It's this brand. It's super soft. Now normally you get like really rough, really sturdy clay, but this clay is super soft. It's super pliable. It's very very pleasant to work with. So my idea is to kind of put it like that. Now it kind of looks complicated, or you know, the idea of this is, the idea is more complicated than the actual practice, I would say. Gonna take a little bit of water and put it on our brush, and we're gonna smooth out. As you can see, we already filled up some of that. And the reason why I use this type of clay is because it's just so friendly to work with. It's super cheap. You could buy it in bulk, and as long as it's airtight sealed, it will stay super flexible. So use your hand to smooth it out a little. Use your, wet brush to work it into those areas. And now Narin did an excellent job of sculpting these bumps with spaces between them, so that you can create an easy, natural transition. I don't think I have to resculpt some of those bumps anyway, so that's good. You could use multi-putty. I've seen people use 2-part epoxy resin. I'm not gonna use that stuff because it's a super aggressive way to fill in something. If you spill it, if you make a mistake, you're kind of screwed. So that's why I use clay. It's easily removable when you make a mistake. It's easily sandable. It takes paint really well. As you can see, I'm just working in that clay right there. I'm kind of surprised by myself and kind of surprised by the ease in which this goes. I always anticipated it being harder than it actually is, and I think that goes for a lot of people in the hobby, is that we kind of overestimate something and then underestimate ourselves. So I'm kind of working it in right there. Just make sure that you really cover that seam line, because you can always remove the excess later. Now I could use my really fancy pants tools. I have really fancy tools for it. These things. These are sculpting tools meant for that gap filling, fixing up mistakes, using clay, multi-putty. But as long as I can do it with a cheap brush and some water, that's the way I'm gonna go with. So yes, you could always use fancy pants, tools and stuff like that, and you could go expensive route. But I think it's much more productive to show people that you can do this with super cheap supplies as well. You don't have to spend hundreds of dollars on tools to do these. But yeah, I could go that route if I wanted to, but I'm not gonna do that. I want to show you guys that everybody can do this. I always say, if I can do it, then everybody else can, because I'm such an idiot sometimes. Obviously I have some my brain is art focused, obviously. If you're not, not everybody can pick up painting and stuff like that. I understand. But if you put your mind to something, then anybody can do what I do. And some people have a harder time learning it. But if you put enough time into it, you can do what I do. So that's why I want to go with the easy things, the easy steps, the easy tools, the simple tools. I could show you guys that with a cheap brush, cheap clay, and some water, you can do this. It doesn't have to be intimidating. And sometimes you just have to try, because this clay is so easily removable. As you can see, I cleaned up some excess from the dreadlock, but it's so easily removable. So sometimes you just have to pick up that courage to start something, to try something. I mean, probably 10 years ago, I didn't think I could do this. Now I switched brushes, I switched to a flat brush because it's a little bit sharper, it's a little bit sturdier, and I can more easily get rid of that excess. And because it's a little bit sturdier, I can work that into the seam a little bit better. And it just picks up that excess a little bit easier. Sometimes you have to play around with this is an excellent brush too. It's really soft to use the water with. And then a flat brush, just a regular dry brush, I would say, because it's so sturdy. It's really good for working in that clay into the gap. So if you're not sure that you've covered that gap entirely, just get some more clay. Now, somebody who's been doing this for 25 years probably has a lot better techniques than I have, and probably uses something else, probably has some kind of magic technique. But for me, like I said earlier, I'm just a regular simple Joe. I can be such an idiot sometimes with just overcomplicating things or thinking about it super easily. It's one way or another. Now again, if you have the tools and you feel comfortable with using tools, then use tools, obviously. For me, it might be a little bit easier, maybe because my brain is wired differently. But everybody can learn how to do this. It just, for some people, it just takes a little bit longer to learn. Other people pick it up in one day and they have super results. But here's also a reason why I used this type of clay is because it might sound silly to use kids clay on a project like this, but the reason is that kids clay is much more pliable. It's much more workable for a longer period of time, and especially if this is just the first time that you're kind of doing this, you might need that extra time. So here we go. We filled up that seam really nicely. So we're gonna get our wet brush. I'm gonna smooth it out a little. And sometimes you're kind of like, okay, do I have to go back in with new clay? And then just take your time. This armpit is always gonna difficult area, I would say. Just work it in. There we go. That's really good. There we go. So we're gonna take a little bit of extra clay again. Gonna work it into that seam. And it might be entirely possible that you've done the filling, and then when it dries, it might shrink a little bit, so that the seam might still be there, but with the clay in it, because it might shrink a little bit. The material tends to, you know, harden, and sometimes I don't know. I think it's called shrinkage, but I don't know how to really explain that. But sometimes when you think you've filled up the entire seam, when it hardens out, there's still like a noticeable seam there, and then you just go back in and redo that line. I've just displayed how easy it is to fill that seam line. It doesn't require you know, it doesn't require like super talented skills or something like that. So if you want to be 100% sure, just keep working it. I think I still need to touch that seam there. It's hard because it's an arm, so where is the... I think that's where the arm should kind of separate from the body, shoulder. That's kind of... think about that. But yeah, sculpting is really not my thing, but you know, having the right materials just really helps a lot. Obviously the quality of the clay matters a lot. I've tried different clays in the past. I mainly the gray type clay and the really sturdy stuff, and that stuff just didn't work for me. But then I came across this stuff, and this worked like a charm. And I do have to say that don't leave it out of the package for long, because it does tend to harden real fast that way. So it needs to be preserved in a bag. But it's super cheap. And it's super pliable. It's super workable. And you want to get off the excess. It's not an issue if you spill some residue or some just extra material on top of there. It's not a real issue. You can, once it dries, you can really real easily remove it. But while you're here, just clean it off. So this is still workable, and we started here, and that was like what, 20 minutes ago, 30 minutes ago, and it's still workable. It's still soft. Get off that excess. Now you can see the white is where we filled it up. Oh, do not fall over. And that's how it kind of looks. And once there's primer over it, maybe after this dries, I have to touch up this line right here. But because it's a bumpy surface, because he's supposed to have deeper areas in between those bumps, between that crocodile skin, basically. It might seem like a very natural kind of line right there, but it might be necessary for me to touch that up once it dries. So yeah, this is what we did. This is always one of the, one of the things that beginner kit builders, beginner painters always, kind of hate to do, is to fill in those seam lines. A lot of people also make the mistake of gluing their pieces together before painting. Sometimes that's a good idea. Sometimes that works. Other times it just complicates the painting process even more. So having separate pieces before painting and then gluing them afterwards is a more a better way to go, basically. And I would say the reason why I use these wooden pins is because I pin my models at the pin and not at the parts, because as soon as I put some super glue on the part itself and it's painted, it will create a kind of fog-like white residue type thing on your paint job, and that would kind of ruin your paint job. So that's why I prefer painting my pieces separately and then glue them onto the pin so that I do not have to glue the parts. That's the kind of the idea. And then you don't have to glue your models before painting. I see a lot of people do that. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But in this case, the only piece that I had to glue was this arm. Then I have to touch up the seam line. That's the only reason why I needed to glue him. If he didn't have the seam line, I would keep him unglued. But like, it might be possible that after this the clay dries between the in the seam line, I have to kind of go over it again, because like I said earlier, it could shrink a little bit, or it could like go deeper as it dries. It slides deeper into that seam line. I don't know, it's shrinkage. I don't know what the term is called, but it kind of looks like it's really smooth right now, and then when it dries, it kind of looks like there's still a seam there. So maybe later, when it's dry, I have to go over it again. But as you saw, it's a super easy process, super fast, super cheap, super easy. Everybody can do it, even if it looks kind of like it's very intimidating, because you have to go over a already beautiful sculpt. You don't want to ruin the original sculpt, and that can seem like really intimidating. So, but as I've showed you, it's not really intimidating at all. The idea of it is more intimidating than the actual work that you have to do on it. So, you know, that's why I kind of like to do these tutorials, is to get people to just, you know, get out there and do it. As you can see, like, there's some residue there from wiping it out, wiping it off, or smoothing it out. It's super easy to remove that. Even when it's dry, it's even easier to remove it. Remember that when this is all dry, you have to primer it, and if you really want to play it safe, you varnish it first and then you primer it. But yeah, like, I really just want to show you guys that this is not intimidating at all. It's not hard to do. It doesn't have to be an expensive type thing. You don't have to use expensive materials. You know, a knife, cheap kids clay, a flat brush, and a smooth brush that you can use with water. That's all you need. You know, and the clay, of course. But yeah, like, that's all you need to do to fill in seam lines. And this process can be applied to, I guess, any type of model. If it's a bust, if it's a miniature, if it's a 75 millimeter model, or just a 1/6 statue, 1/6 scale statue. Doesn't matter, process still remains the same. The smaller the model, the smaller the brushes that you're gonna use, obviously, because the surfaces are smaller.